Hi everyone and welcome back to another Monday guide. Yes, it's true, we're back on a Navy theme, and in this guide I will look at the Midget Submarine. More specifically, I will share my tests where I try to figure out if it's any good or bad, and if good, in what scenarios. And I have to say, after a few hours of testing, that it's actually quite good, because I expected it to be really crap, but I got surprised, and in some particular scenarios it's really usable. So I look forward to share this with you, and I hope you will enjoy the guide. Alright, so in this guide we will look at the Midget Submarine, and that is a special project you can do in Götterdammerung. And it's one of the first ones, so you can start it pretty much right from the start if you have one of the facilities for naval, and you need a breakthrough as well. But once you start it, you will make a decision on the design, and you can basically go middle, which gives it more reliability, or you can make it a bit more stealthier with 20% less range, which is not really good because, well, it already has very little range. Or you can go for more range, but then more visibility, but then you kind of start losing one of the real perks of having this midget submarine. But more to that later. But those are the decision in design you can take from the start. And when you research it and it's done, and you play a majors, you can do it right from the start pretty much. Then you can have it out somewhere 37. But if you play a minor, then probably a little bit later. But it's still something you get very early on in the game. Okay, so let's start with talking a little bit about its strengths, or what are the perks of building a midget submarine. And the first one, which I think is the most obvious one, and that is the cost. So if you compare a midget submarine like a regular design we're in January 37, I can start building them as the UK, and I have the level 2 tier things on it. So the comparable to sub 2, which would have the same stuff, basically. You can see that it's less than half the cost of a sub 2, which is really, really cheap. And on top of that, it's also very, very low visibility. So the midget submarine has sub visibility 15, where the submarine 2 has sub visibility 22, which is a big, big difference. And if we look down in the different hulls of submarines, so the early submarine has visibility 25, then it's 22, sub 3s have 20, and sub 4s have 16. So not even sub 4s have lower visibility than the midget submarines, because they start with 15. But then of course they can add snorkel, which would give you lower than 13%, so they would go quite low as well, the sub 4s, but at a different cost, of course. So what are the weaknesses of the midget submarine? Well, I already mentioned it a little bit, but it's the range. So if you look at the max range of this one, it's 500 kilometers, which is nothing, to be honest. It's really, really low. And then also the second one is that it has a few slots, so it can't add radar or snorkel or more torpedo slots. So those are the real downsides of using it. And before going on to the next part, I just wanna mention that most of you watching this are yet not subscribers to the channel. So please hit that subscribe button, like, comment, and you will receive a new guide from me and Boppus every Monday. If you're another guy and you wanna support this circus of nerdery, then you can consider becoming a Patreon, and then you'll receive an archive of 40 Patreon exclusive guides and an additional 2 every month, as long as you stay as a member. So check it out, it's in the description below or above, or somewhere. Yeah, let's continue. Alright, so let's start with the testing. And what I've done now is that I've declared war on Italy. We're in central Mediterranean, and I'm using Malta as my base of attack for making these tests. So what I've done is that I have 2 groups of midget submarines, the ones we just looked at, the 37 models, and then I compare them to the 37 models. So those are like the same kind of tier things that I could get out in mid 37 basically. What I've done is then that I attack undefended Italian submarines, convoys, and see what happens, and then try to draw some conclusions on that. And basically, as you can see now, we can take one fight just for the fun of it. So you can start also see that the midget submarines, you see the range here, These are the standard ones, so I've just took the middle one in the design in the beginning, which means that I have a default 500 range kilometers in range. But even though I can only like go 3 tiles around Malta, I can still make attacks all over as long as I can find the enemy. So right now I'm attacking up here with 5 of my midget submarines, and we can just pause and see what happens. And then I can see one hit, a few hits, almost sinking a few ones. This was probably a very unlucky. There are 3. Yeah, okay, how many did we get? 3. Okay, that was exceptional low. So here's another one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 lost. Let's see if we have one more. Just to get some more data points. There's another 17 engagement. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, 9 sunk. Alright, so in this testing, most of the fights were ended up with between like 6 and 9 or something like that. So those are like the intervals most of the times. And then I did the same test with the groups of 5 of the regular submarines, and they basically did the same amount of number of sunks if they were unexperienced. So, but they cost twice as much. But the second, and this is the main thing about convoy raiding, but the second they came up over 16 torpedo attack, they could one hit the convoys. Because that's the thing you always have to remember when you do this testing. Convoys have 60 HP, which means that if you do more than 60 in damage and you hit them, they get sunk right away. And my midget submarines, they are in this case right now 34, which means they need a double hit to sink a convoy. Where right now my regular submarines have plus 69, which means that they insta hit them. So the 2 different tests I did was used both of them unexperienced and with bad advisors, and then they basically did the same damage because they both had to double hit. But then if you added traits and advisors and admiral or like doctrine and everything, then you got over 16 torpedo attack on the regular submarines, and they were started to one hit. But based on the IC, it's basically you did twice the damage on the regular submarines, but for twice the cost. So IC wise, it was still like a 1-to-1 kind of relationship to it. The upside, however, of the midget submarines was that you have more of them, which means that you can then hit all the different convoy routes at the same time. So if there are multiple convoy routes in the zone, then you could like cover all of them and get more raiding efficiency, basically close down all the supply or all the trade. Whereas you need more, you need to cover all the routes basically, so it's easier to reach that point. And they also have lower visibility, which means that they are more difficult to find and sink if you have some countermeasures. The downside then, of course, is that if we would go anywhere else apart from the Central Med, I mean, you can see the range I have. I could probably do Eastern Med. I don't have pretty much any range in Western Med, a little bit outside of Gibraltar, but it's very limited of where I can operate. But in this isolated test in the Central Med, the midget subs have a slight upside because you can have more of them in the same zone, and then you do, of course, and you have equal bang for the bucks, basically. All right, so now on to my second test, and this was the thing that really kind of blew my mind when I did this testing. Because like I said before, when you do convoy raiding, you want to get to a torpedo damage above 60, so you can start one-hitting the convoys, because that's when it gets really efficient and you can really burn through the enemy convoys at a high pace. And then also to clarify on my previous testing, what I meant with having more midget submarines, I meant because they're cheaper, you can make more task groups easily with a lot of them. So because it's cheaper basically. So when you have multiple task groups in raiding, then one task group can attack one convoy route, and then if you have, for example, 10 different task groups, then you can potentially attack 10 different convoy routes at the same time. So that's what I meant with that. Yes, but basically what I managed to do was that if I added and I cheated a bit, so don't mind the timer up here. But I took the 1944 submarine, that one and that tech, and added it to the Midget Submarine, and then I compared it, what do I get for the money. And with all traits and everything, I could manage to get the Midget Submarine 4 in over 60 torpedo attack. So basically you see the design now. I added the latest designs to the Midget Submarines, and you see that the cost is 348. So it costs nothing, and with this one I can one-hit submarines. The visibility with the latest engine is down to 12.7, and I could get it even lower with the right Mayo. But it's really, really low for a very, very low cost. The range is still really crap, of course, but yeah, that's like the real downside of this mid-submarine. But basically what this means is that at the end game, or in like 43 or something, when you can get this ahead of time, you can get a midget submarine that can start one-hitting. It does require you, because you see that it says 31.5 here in torpedo attack, but with all the buffs and my advice, Admiral and everything, you see it's 66. And that is because I have doctrine, I have a little bit of experience, not that much though. That's also one way to get it up. But yeah, the submarine attack, I have yeah, all the different buffs you can get everywhere basically. And then it's quite easy to get it above there. Yeah, the traits of course as well. So there are several ways to do this, and different Myers are better at it and so on, but it's quite easy to get it over 60 torpedo attack, and then they get really, really usable. So just if you compare this one with the submarine 44s, they have extremely long range, the sub 44s, but they have roughly the same visibility and cost 4 times as much as this one. So in those really like contested zones like the Central Med, you get a lot of bang for the buck with this nice little midget submarine. All right, so now we talked about the testing. So where can you use them? Because the range is the big downside of this one. Everything else is kind of good in terms of IC, what you get for the money. So it's the range that's the main issue of this one. And I have to say, of course, then you can make the range longer in the design, and you can add some range to the Mayo and so on. And then it's get a little bit better, but it's still really crap. So I kind of narrowed it down to 3 different areas of usage where I think they are worth using. And the first one is like Central Med, like a contested zone. Somewhere where you know the enemy will be, there will be a lot of ship movements, and they will try to move some convoys or trade routes, like a contested zone. That would be the Central Med, it could be the English Channel. In those zones, you get a lot of convoy raiding for a very low IC, and they have very low visibility, which means that even though the enemy tries to find them, it's still quite difficult. And you can do this also early in the game. So that's one really good area of usage. Another one is key raiding hubs, if you have access to them, depending on what scenario you play. But that could be if you own like the, what do you call it, like the Azores, I think this is. Cape Verde. Yeah, that's where it's up here. No, the Cape Verde, because a lot of trades go through here. If you're South Africa and you want to raid someone around you, the Cape of Africa, that could be another good one. Around the Suez or in Arabia, if there's trade going through here. Singapore and so on. Like the few narrow places where you know a lot of trade will go and they can't really move around it, that's where they could be very usable. And then to the last point where I think most countries can use them, and that is if you play a country where you kind of risk being naval invaded. Then this is kind of like the perfect turtle coastal defense. So let's say you play Italy, the classical one, and you're playing Axis, and the allies want to do the soft underbelly of Europe, invade Europe. Then the classical both MP and single player strategy as Italy is just to create a lot of submarines in the Mediterranean and make it pretty much impossible to anyone to naval invade you. And then you have some air support to cover that. That's a likely scenario for Italy. What you can do if you just spam midget submarines, it becomes pretty much impossible for the UK to kind of naval invade you without running into like a sea of a lot of submarines raiding the shit out of you. So that's like a classical turtle turtle build with submarines. And that could be used like any country that has a coastline where you risk being invaded. Sweden, I mean the UK, absolutely. Germany covering the coastal line of Europe. Those kind of scenarios. Japan as well. So it's very cheap to get something that just covers everything in very, very small task groups. So, as some kind of conclusion, are they good? Are they worth building? Well, it kind of depends. I mean, if you play a scenario or a country where you have one of the mentioned areas that I talked about, like the central Mediterranean, and you're fighting against Italy, or you are Italy and fighting against allies, yes, it can be very useful. Or if you're the UK or the Germany and want to challenge the English Channel, then it's useful. Or you own one of these hotspots where a lot of trade goes through and has to go through, and you can like shut that down, then it could be useful. But apart from that, really the range limits it. So in most scenarios, like a classical, like a comparable sub 2 that you get 36 in the game, this one, I mean, thanks to the range of that one, it has much more areas of usage. You can use it in like many different scenarios, and you can play more dynamic with that kind of submarines. And the higher you go in tier, the longer range you get, and the more dynamic you can be in your raiding game. So I kind of like in general, like the regular submarines, I would say are better. But for some very niche scenarios where you really want to play on low visibility and you want to have a lot of them to really overload the enemy, then the Midget Submarine has a very, very strong purpose. And especially in the end game, which was the very unsurprising one, because then you can get above 60 torpedo attack with all the buffs. And they can even start to one-hit convoys, which makes them really, really powerful for the end game in the challenged areas. So like the Channel or in Central Med. And I have to say, yes, the Channel is, what do you call it? It's a shallow sea, but even though they still have so low visibility, so you could still potentially use them in that zone and don't lose too many of them, or if you want to challenge for a short period of time. So yeah, that's my conclusion. So Midget submarines, usable if you have a certain user case for them. If not, I would recommend regular submarines, but they are better than I expected.